What's up, world? This is your guy, Guitar K, and today we're going to be talking about desires. Desires without boundaries? Slavery, man. Look, I'm talking about moderation. I'm talking about balance. If there's anything that you like to do it so much that you can't put a cap on it, at the end of the day, you become a slave to it. Look. I know you've seen the movies, and sometimes some of us don't like to watch these type of movies. But if you ever saw a movie where there's slavery going on, it's usually some jerk, some douchebag that's at the head of that slavery cracking a whip. He's cracking that whip. And I'm telling you, whatever that thing is that you can't say no to, that you can't turn it down, you just can't resist, that's your master. That's your slave driver. It's cracking that whip on you. And it will push you to do things, unspeakable things. Look, in recovery, we got a term that say that all your nevers will become true. And that's what happens when you got a desire that you can't put a boundary on. It ain't no telling what you'll do. You'll do anything because you don't got no self-control. You don't got no discipline. Look. I've heard people say stuff like, I just couldn't help myself. Or I just couldn't resist it. Woo! Look, man, we got to change our ways of thinking. And it comes from practice. You got to understand that you have to have boundaries. You have to be able to stop. You got to turn all the way around. You got to stop, man. Look, don't be a slave to anything. That's how you don't be a slave to the certain things. And when I say anything, I mean nothing. You can't be a slave to money. You can't be a slave to girls. You can't be a slave to attention. You can't be a slave to power. Because when you start being a slave to those things, look, you heard the term before, man. Look. When you stand for nothing, you fall for anything. You got to start practicing in the small things. That will help you to resist the big things. Look. I know it's making sense and I know it's registering. Because a lot of us, even before we picked up a drug, even before we took a drink, we ain't had no self-control to start with. We ain't had no discipline to start with. That was the problem right there. We ain't have no boundaries. Look, we know if we like that girl, grandma said we can't go to the party, man, we'll sneak out the window. We ain't no telling what we'll do. Why? Because we can't say no. We can't resist it. We're going to do what we want to do to get what we want to get. Instant gratification. Pleasure before principles. All of that type of thinking, man, it got to go out the window if you ever going to turn your life around. If you ever going to become a new person. It takes a transformation in everything. Your behavior, your thinking. You can't think the way that you used to. Don't be a slave to your desires. Don't be a slave to pleasure. Practice patience. Practice long suffering. At the end of the day, you don't want to admit it, but I know some people out there right now, you know you're a slave to something. You're a slave to that girl. You're a slave to that guy. You're a slave to that paycheck. You're a slave to them Jordans. You're a slave to them video games. You're a slave to something. It's something that at a drop of a dime, you will turn completely away from doing what you know what you're supposed to do just to do that thing. Look, Lauryn Hill said it best, man. Girls, you know you better watch out. Yeah, man, look. That thing. And I'm guilty myself. We all are, man. But it takes mindfulness. It takes practice. Like I said, we got to practice self-control. We got to practice discipline. Look, when we have desires without boundaries, like I said, you stand for nothing and you will fall for anything. Because at the end of the day, when that thing shows its ugly head, all bets is off, man. Everything's out the window. That's why you got to practice being strong. And it starts in the small things, step by step, day by day. Don't talk about what you're never going to do. Just don't do it right now. Just don't do it today. Look, we can be slaves to anything. If you desire it without boundaries, you'll do anything for it. You become a slave for it. Like I said, already hit the big heavy hitters: sex, attention, food, cigarettes, alcohol, power, respect. Look, you can be a slave to your own negative thinking. You ever heard somebody, they keep getting in trouble, and you go visit them in the prison, and you be like, boy, what happened? You be like, man, you know how I do. Look,
what?
Stop doing how you do. Don't be a slave to your old ways. Don't be a slave to proving yourself. Look, You gotta change if you think it's going to change, man. It is almost psycho level thinking for you to think that your life gonna get any better if you don't change the way you think, if you don't change the way you talk, if you don't change the way you walk. Picture this. You go to the doctor with a hip problem. And he said, your problem is you're not walking with the proper form. But you like how that walk look. You think it's slick because you be bopping around like George Jefferson. So you think you're going to just keep bopping. Look, you got a choice. You can change the way you walk, or you're going to keep having that pain in your hip. That's what I'm talking about, man. Don't be a glutton for pain, man. Be open-minded. Learn to change. Learn to adapt. Learn to pivot. Because in this world, man, if there's anything that's constant, it's change. And I know you heard that before, man. Tupac told us, man, things change. That's just the way it is. Look. And I'm talking about, it be so evident sometimes of what you need to change, what you need to stop, what you need to start. Don't be a slave to your old ways. They say that we could be terminally hip and fatally cool. You could be a slave to your block. You could be a slave to your image. You could be a slave to the mask that you wear. You could be a slave to not wanting to look like you're smart. You could be a slave to not wanting to look like you're lame. Look, man, lame keep you in the game, baby. Keep you out of that jail cell. Keep you out of that grave. There's nothing wrong with being your true, authentic self today. Be yourself. It'll take you further, man. You could be a slave to unhealthy practices. You could be a slave to eating the wrong foods. You could be a slave to not following directions. At the end of the day, we all have something that we need to change. Self-improvement. We need to be getting better and better every day. 1% a day. I said it in the video the other day. We need to grow 1% a day. You could be a slave to not listening, a slave to being hard-headed. Look, man, desires without boundaries. You have to have a desire to change the day. You have to have a desire to be better. In recovery, man, we have a saying, 1 is too many and 1,000 is never enough, man. That is such a powerful statement. And back when I first heard it, I didn't quite understand it. That's because I still wanted to get high. So I was like, man, give me thousands of drugs. I'll take them. But now I understand what they mean, man. It's never enough of anything that you got to desire without a boundary. Never enough money. Never enough girls. Never enough attention. You're going to want more and more and more until you learn that everything needs to be done in balance. It needs to be done in moderation, man. Learn to go sit your dumb ass down every once in a while. Take a load off. Be content. Seek out some peace. Seek out some patience. Seek out to know that it's okay just to be okay today. Every day don't have to be a party. It don't always have to be super exciting. I hear so many people talking about they bored. You're not bored, man. You just don't know the difference between peace and boredom. It's okay to just sit today and don't have to hear no police sirens run down the street. Don't see nobody arguing and bickering and a whole bunch of nonsense and chaos all the time, man. You could be a slave to your old way. You could be a slave to chaos. You could be a slave to nonsense. Look, man. Desires without boundaries. Learn some boundaries. Learn some boundaries today. Learn to be just even keel. Too much pleasure will send you into too much pain. Learn to walk that middle road, the middle road of serenity, man. Look. Change what you desire. Desire peace. Desire serenity. Learn to appreciate contentment. And at the end of the day, I found out that it's okay just to be okay. I desire just to be okay, man. And okay, that's a boundary. It don't have to be super exciting. This is your guy, Guitar K. Be more